So, hello, hi there everyone, and welcome to the Research Association of New Zealand contribution to the ESOMAR International Market Research Day. This year, the theme is to talk about the value that our industry provides to the world in the context of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I'm joined here today by Murray Campbell and Maria Tyrrell. And we're going to be pondering the notion, what would the world be like without market research? And we'll do that specifically in the context of 3 of those sustainable development goals that we've chosen. Morning, Murray and Maria, how are you?
Very well,
Excellent.
Thanks.
Before we start, I should say that Maria and Murray are the 2 most recent inductees to the Market Research Hall of Fame here in New Zealand, otherwise known as 2 most recent life members of the Research Association. Can you just maybe give us a little bit of a potted history of your contribution to the industry? How have you got to where you are today, Maria?
Well, I'm a Global Director of Brand Strategy at Kantar, and I'm also the Global Lead for Needscope. So Needscope's a motivational research tool which started in New Zealand and is now part of Kantar. So I guess I've always worked particularly with commercial companies and helping them understand consumers and why they do what they do.
Fantastic, thank you, Murray.
Well, yes, been in research for quite a few decades. I guess I've always been drawn to the political, social side of research, be it political polling or the impact of social policy on people's lives. And that's held a lifelong fascination. And like Maria, I guess there's always that link between what people think and what actually happens. And I think, that's always the case of how do we help other people understand to make better decisions on behalf of others. So yes, long may that remain. Yeah.
Fair to say then, we've kind of got a fairly broad swathe of the industry represented by the 2 of you, with more of a commercial bent and maybe more of a public political polling bent. Let's kick it off by posing that big question in a kind of a weird reverse sort of a way. Can you imagine a world without market research? How much better or worse would the world be without market research? Now, ultimately, we want to get to answer the question why market research is good.
Sure.
But let's do that. Murray, go far away.
Sure. I mean, it's quite easy to imagine, because I've worked in places like Egypt and Cambodia, where you have to get government sign-off to run anything of a political nature. And that's there for a very good reason, because what they decide to do and how they like to determine the fate and the future of their country is quite independent of what the people want. So that's a very I guess tangible and sometimes quite unsettling picture of what it's like when the voice of the people, the voice of the customer, the voice of the consumer is not heard, and sometimes it's suppressed.
Absolutely. Is there an equivalent in the commercial world, Maria?
Yeah, I think in the more commercial world, you could argue that people will vote with their feet. If companies aren't doing what people want and need, they'll just not buy the product. However, that's incredibly wasteful, and nobody wants to be wasteful, particularly companies. So I think market research brings that sense of what people actually want and need, so it reduces waste, so that companies can be efficient, giving people what they will actually purchase, and less wasteful.
So fair to say at this stage, before we've really delved into it, that both of you would argue that the world is a better place because of market research.
Absolutely.
I'm sure.
Let's start to dig into this a little bit. The first of the 3 goals that I want to focus on, these are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 of them. Look them up. The first of the 3 I want to talk about is Goal 10, and it is all about reducing inequality. And I suspect that you've both touched on that a little bit in your big picture answer. Maria, what is it about market research, in your view, that contributes to reducing inequality in the world, if anything?
Yeah, well, I think that what research does is bring an independent view and a broad view. You can argue these days, social media gives a voice to the consumer, and it does, but it's inherently biased. And what we can do is bring everybody's voice. And, you know, for some, it may be the only voice they have, or to help the disempowered who perhaps feel they haven't got a way to talk to either companies or governments. So I think it's very much about bringing that voice to the table. That is, you know, we have, you know, we sample from huge variety of sources and samples and peoples, and so that everyone has a chance to have their say. And without that, then, you know, I do think companies can go down rabbit warrens. They can listen to the echo chambers of social media and go down a route that's perhaps not what people want, and ultimately fail.
Just picking up on the social media link there, what role do you think social media does have next to market research, or put that the other way around, market research next to social media?
Yeah, I mean, to me, social media is another source. Of course, it can be incredibly insightful. It's also probably one of the ways that companies very quickly can realize if they are going off track, because people are very vocal. But it is often a vocal minority, or it's an echo chamber. And so you're not necessarily getting the broad view that you need to develop products and services which will satisfy consumers, but also, you know, hopefully make the world a better place. So without it, I think it's another source that you need to look at. And a lot of research does, of course. We're not just, you know, going out and talking to consumers via surveys. We are looking at social media and how that's playing out, what people are saying and doing as well.
I've heard it referred to as the signal to noise ratio in social media is quite low.
Yes.
Partly because the vocal minority, I think you described them as, can have their voice amplified way more than is proportionally reasonable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Murray?
Oh, I think that we've seen that played out over the last 7 or 8 years, where I guess within the political space, obviously very wealthy interests can pay for a voice to be amplified many times louder than they deserve to be. The other thing is just within the general communities, and Twitter, I guess, was an example of that 3 or 4 years ago, where the most articulate gain far greater credence and I guess central to the argument just because they are articulate, as opposed to the needs of a broader group. And that's where you see the rise of the digital divide, where, you know, decision makers are attracted to the most articulate and resonant sound, as opposed to the people who have got the greatest needs. So yeah, it's a real challenge between market research and social media. I think another fundamental thing is that market research tends, and researchers themselves tend to have a good heart. You know, that when you meet hundreds and thousands of research, they typically want to do the right thing.
That's a good point.
And quite often within social media, that same intrinsic desire to do the right thing is absent. So I think, without blowing our trumpet too loudly, market researchers have, I think, a value of the values.
Just picking up on the connection you made there, political interests using social media to amplify a story. Political interests also do polling, don't they? They do their own polling. They're also, obviously, they watch public polling. Is that a use of polling when a political interest does it and sponsors it, that is consistent with the equality message?
With the equality?
In other words, is there a risk that political interests doing political polling might confound the...
No, I haven't seen it in most Western democracies, because the polling companies are completely independent of the political parties. And even if they weren't, it's entirely in their interest to understand what is the independent truth of the matter, unless you're using it to say, well, you know, maybe in some communist countries I can think of, congratulations, we've just done a poll and 95% of the voting public support the incumbent. I mean, but almost all polling companies, it's in their interest to understand the independent truth of the matter.
This question may age this session, but there is an example of that playing out in Europe right now.
Sure.
Am I right?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with any of the polling that has gone on, or
Not outside of Russia, no. But I don't, in these situations, I don't think a political poll, the purpose of a political poll in these situations would simply be to confirm what people intrinsically know, that there is something fundamentally wrong going on and action is required. But I think political polling is much more valuable, coming back to your question of helping inequality or injustice, is helping with resolving dilemmas or resolving which is the best direction to take. But we have a situation, as we're seeing in Ukraine, there's no ambiguity.
Let me just be devil's advocate for a minute here.
Sure.
Market research simply measures what is. There's nothing inherently or inherent in what we do that impacts equality one way or the other, is there not? It simply requires the people who are the receivers of our output to act. Am I being unreasonably unfair on our industry, do you think, Maria?
I think some research is like that, and I would argue that's not great research, because we should be about bringing our collective voice so that we can understand what consumers, where the world is going. And, you can argue that things like ethical purchasing, so people wanting to purchase perhaps ethical food products, meat products, research was picking that up quite some time ago, where people were saying, actually, I'm not comfortable buying this product that perhaps has not been ethically produced. And it took a long time for the manufacturers to catch up and for people to then, so, we were picking that up quite early, but manufacturers, it's costly to change.
Mm-hmm.
So they take a while. So I think that's a good example where we were monitoring that. We knew that was going on. And some of the leaders, you then got new brands coming out, which was all about ethical. And so, that voice was finally heard. So I think, we are capable of doing that. Good research does that, is looks beyond the now and tries to help companies pivot to what is the coming thing. And I think about companies, lots of research companies around the world, like Kantar, during COVID, did like COVID barometers, where they went out, interviewed thousands of people, did all the social media trawling, and produced something which was given to companies to say, this is how people are feeling, this is how anxious they are, this is what's important to them, so this is what you need to be doing to actually help people through this crisis as a company. So I think that, it can be very future focused, and it should be.
Absolutely. I'm persuaded, by the way. Yeah.
I think you're doing quite a good job as the devil, actually. But I guess, a lot of research, and it's criticized particularly by other agencies as being hindsight research or locked in the past research. And to Maria's point, I think the problem with some research is that just focuses on the averages or focuses on the mainstream. And it should be focusing also on the edges of change, or the engine of change. And I think that's where the really interesting stuff happens, is to be able to sense something's going to change before it becomes mainstream. And, I think all strengths to research companies that can do that, or, position their business of that nature.
Just building on that, I think also, researchers' job is not just to report stuff back. We're not, we're the voice of the consumer, but also with our collective, because we're talking to consumers all the time, we build this knowledge. So it's actually our responsibility to bring all of that knowledge to companies and clients, and to say, actually, this is bigger than just this little survey I've done for you.
Yeah.
There's a bigger thing going on here.
Yeah.
We know and understand consumers. We understand the context. We know what's going on. So I think we actually have quite a big responsibility to not just, here's the answer to your question, but more than that, we bring that collective voice of the consumer.
And I think it's important too that we can convey that sometimes change isn't linear. Change isn't just right in front of you. It might be in a direction to left or right. And that to a considerable extent comes back to a collective wisdom or experience of what you've seen elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think, coming again back to your question, that isn't just about the past. It's the beauty of what we do is that you can draw on experiences from different categories and sometimes different countries.
That's right.
Who are on different trajectories. So you're bringing that collective wisdom beyond the numbers.
Fantastic. I'm going to use a couple of things that you said, Maria, there to segue into the next Sustainable Development Goal, which is all about sustainable production and consumption. And I know you've got some thoughts on that. You kind of touched on it because we as an industry are leading in that regard.
We are, yes. So that sustainable, so the SDG, is it number 13?
It is actually number 12.
12, I was close.
You know these goals.
Sustainable consumption and production, so it's not just consumption. And the UN says that globally we increased our material footprint by more than 70% since 2000, which, if you think about it, is really scary. And if that continues, well, we kind of probably all know the outcome of that. So it's about then companies looking to reduce waste and improve quality of life. And again, you could argue, well, people will just vote with their feet, but there's been lots of surveys done where it's shown that people believe that companies, corporations, organisations have just as much role to play in sustainability as governments, which, if you're a company, is a little scary, that somehow it is, consumers see it as your responsibility to do something about making the world a better place. And so that puts a lot onto companies of that expectation. And so our role as researchers then is to go and understand, well, how do we do that? And if you think about marketing, it started off as you were marketing products. What did people, product marketing, it then became all about the brand. And I would argue today, it's actually all about brand purpose. So for a lot of the briefs we get, it's either purely about finding a higher purpose, or it's at least part of it, that is something that is very much, a balanced scorecard now is doesn't just have the brand on it, it kind of has brand purpose. So that sustainability and responsible production is incredibly important to companies now.
Is there anything analogous in the public sphere to production and consumption? It's on the face of it not. Is there any connection?
I think there is, in terms of the sustainability of not only government agencies, but how they support Western economies. And there's a lot of signals, be it price signals or policy signals, about sustainability. I think we're all very, very conscious of that. The big challenge, be it commercial or public sector, is how to advance sustainability without encroaching on people's personal desires. And that's also the challenge for market research as well. Because a lot of market research is about how to advance branded experiences, right? And some of those branded experiences, be it fast moving packaged goods or high quality products, is about the expression of my internal needs. And how does that cross over with sustainability? So we're kind of in the middle of that dilemma ourselves, but I'm pretty confident that we're better placed to resolve that than most.
And that, again, it comes back to that collective responsibility that we have to encourage companies to do the right thing, to do less harm, to improve things. And Unilever is held up as an example where, since 2018, they've said every single one of the brands in their portfolio has to have a higher purpose. They get criticised because sometimes a mayonnaise is just a mayonnaise, but you have to give them credit for continuing on that path and saying, we want to do less harm, we want to improve people's lives. Yes, we want to sell our products, but if we can do that and be a better force and be a force of change in the world, then that has got to be a good thing. And I think a lot of companies have followed that. And like I say, a lot of the briefs we get now are all about what is our purpose.
Let me get my little horns out again and be the devil. Everything that the two of you have said makes perfect sense in developed Western economies. What about what impact can the insights industry has it had, can it have any impact in emerging economies? Or are we leaving them behind?
I don't think it's in some ways right to see it as like a linear thing, that where the Western economies have gone, then the developing nations will follow the same pathway. I think there's every opportunity, particularly with digital technology and we're seeing it right now within India, and you start to see it within Africa, etc., where they develop their own trajectories, rightly or wrongly. So I don't think they're just following the taillights of another country or another group of countries. The other point, what role can market research play? To a considerable extent, it comes back to what Maria was saying. What can large multinational companies do as a leadership position, as opposed to, well, it's up to the will of the individual. And again, I think well-founded market research with the foundations, particularly of sustainability, could have a very strong role in that, and to make it actually aspirational, to be light and in terms of its impact on the world. So
You could also argue that companies have learned from mistakes they've made in Western economies, and some of whether it's single-use plastic or whatever it is, that should not be, hopefully, redone in more developing economies, that they are, and to a certain extent, the developing economies don't necessarily have the economic ability that to pay for some of this stuff. So actually companies have to be smarter about how they produce and how consumption happens. So I think you could argue that the benefit that actually they're going to do a better job in terms of the products, how the way they produce and the products that they give consumers in those markets, if they're doing the right thing.
Last question on this sustainability goal. Do you think there's enough being done in the research industry to bring the consumer truth that you talked about, Maria, what they're really looking for, to our clients? Is there anything more that can be done, do you think?
I think, well, one is the reactive answer is lots of briefs are all about purpose and sustainability and how we can do better. So we respond to those. On the proactive side, again, I know lots of companies are starting to have sustainability practices, and actually more proactively, in the same way that we brought, messages to clients about COVID, is bringing that collective wisdom and thoughts about how it plays out in different cultures, or, if you're not, and bringing things like, I'm familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals because that's what Kantar uses as the basis for its sustainability practice, because it's about bringing that to the forefront with clients. So I think, again, you say, researchers, we're generally good people, we want to do the right thing. So when there's a big issue like this, which affects everybody and the world, good research will proactively bring that. So yeah, I think absolutely.
Anything more that could be done, do you think, Murray, as an industry?
I think that my answer is a bit broader in terms of, it's not just a matter of the insights that are generated or the future scenarios that are developed. There's also the responsibility of the client and their organization itself to take hold of those opportunities and then make the best of those decisions. And I think there's very much a joint responsibility in this. And that might be a topic for another debate, I don't know, but I think, quite often we'll look back at the research we may have done over the last 2 or 3 years and wonder if only, the clients had taken that, or their own career trajectory hadn't changed. So the momentum you build up isn't lost because of a change in leadership within that organization. So yeah, I think part of the answer is what is done with the insights, how are the decisions implemented.
But I would argue that our role then has to be to inspire clients, to make them really understand what needs to be done, but also inspire them to be the force of change, to be that if people are expecting companies to be just as responsible for this as governments, that they are the leaders, that they do want to do that.
Yeah.
I just want to pick up on this because this is a drum I have been beating myself a little bit lately. I think there's a huge potential for clients to become more invested in the process of finding things out, which is ultimately the process that we help them with.
Yeah.
In other words, what I see is that clients expect the story to be told to them and maybe even actions to be suggested, and then they will follow it, rather than becoming part of the process of finding out and therefore owning much more deeply the things that are found out. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. I think there's this enormous busyness in people's minds and lives, and our digital way of living has made that even more so. That the bandwidth that anyone has to focus on an idea, develop it, challenge it, implement it, monitor it, etc., is incredibly narrow now. And there's so many differences of opinion and sources of information. Sometimes I wonder it's a miracle anything gets done. But I think it's a massive challenge of being actively engaged in the decision making in a long-term fashion.
And to your point, Maria, it really is up to the research industry to encourage clients to be part of the process.
Absolutely, to lead them and say, this is big, this is coming, this is important. You need to do something, or maybe in 10 years, people will then vote. I keep saying it, vote with their feet.
In their wallets.
And their wallets. Both their feet and their wallets.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In their Bitcoin.
Or their Bitcoin or whatever.
Exactly.
So there's one more United Nations sustainability goal that I want to ask about, and that is goal number 16, the second to last, to promote peaceful and inclusive societies with justice for all. Murray, I know you've got some thoughts about this because your background talks to this.
Right. Sound like a hippie, don't I? I think it's part of a civilized society where smaller groups can still feel that their voice is heard and they don't just hear lip service in reply. I think that increasingly there's almost this kind of paradox that social media and digital media has enabled many voices to be heard, but whether they're actually listened or acted on is a completely different issue.
Are they heard in proportion to the actual voice?
There's that, and the other thing which I think is even more difficult to resolve is that the decision makers tend to be from a different group than some of the people that they're acting on behalf of. And there is definitely a lost in translation process going on about how different people think, how they absorb information. And we saw that during the pandemic about different communication platforms being used, which were completely separate from the people they're trying to help. So, there's hopefully a lot of learnings to be drawn from that, which are cross commercial as well. But they're certainly going through this paradoxical situation of greater platforms of communication hasn't enabled greater communication.
One of the three parts to this goal is inclusiveness, and I think that inherent in the way market research works is inclusiveness, right? Because we draw our samples as closely as possible to represent the people that we want to hear from. Interested if you've got any comments on that, Maria, but particularly interested in the peace and justice angle as well.
I think, where the companies can have a role, a higher purpose can be anything. We talked before about sustainability and responsible production and consumerism, but of course, companies can also have a higher purpose, which is around peace and justice. So, advocating for or getting people's voices out there, helping in country where perhaps there is a lot of inequality. So that's another way to have a purpose. You can, the reality is a company could pick from any of the 17 SDGs, and that could be their purpose, more or less. So I think it's absolutely valid. And just going back to what Murray was saying, I used to be involved with one of the kind of quite well known political polls in New Zealand. And when we would go and interview people and we would say we were doing this poll, they would literally say, excellent, I've been waiting for you guys to come. Now, this is what you need to tell the government. And it was always this, yes, that's right, that's exactly, you tell us, no, what do you want us to, so that sense that I have my voice and I can have a sense of justice because I get to tell you what you need to tell the government. So I think that's, we underestimate it, and sometimes people say, oh, research, and we don't do that anymore. Well, who's going to have that voice? Don't just listen to the social media. Who's going to give you that voice?
Yeah.
I want to put a very big picture, purpose. You talked a lot about purpose, and I actually think it's important that we as an industry have a purpose, embrace the purpose and talk about the purpose. And having put a bit of thought into it, I'm wondering if our purpose can be articulated like this, that we are, as an industry, involved in growing humanity's understanding of itself so that everybody can be better served. Does that make sense?
I think that's beautiful.
Yeah,
it's interesting because when on a few occasions I've spoken to our clients about what is great research, and I said great research is when you get an insight that enables you to hover above the situation you're trying to understand. So you almost have a 360 view of what's going on, and you hover above your own personal experiences or predilections. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about there, that you research on a good day with the following wind is about rising above the everyday and getting that insight, that real illumination of what's going on, and hopefully for the betterment of our lives.
I would argue that having the insight is one thing, making sure that people who can act on it understand it and do actually take good actions.
Which is my whole point about inspiring. That it's not just our role to report and say people would like this or that. It's actually to inspire and engage and help clients, actually activate that vision. Because otherwise, as you say, it's just a piece of paper that you hand over and nothing happens.
Good luck with that. I'm on to the next one.
Bye. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's just round this off, wrap it up, put a bow on it with just a little bit of, this is a little bit twee, but I want us to think a little bit about the future. What thoughts do you have about what we as an industry, where we as an industry are going, or where we should be going?
Right. I think first and foremost, we need to value ourselves more and be more self-confident and self-aware of what we know and what difference we can make. And in a word, be prouder of what we do. I think we probably need to be more strategic too in our connections and branding of what we provide. I think we've also got a job to reconnect with the general public. I think in some quarters, even in New Zealand, that there is a skepticism, a cynicism about being involved in anything to do with research because it's connected to mainstream media, which is this acronym now that's seen as bad. So we've got, as always, a PR job to do, but I think it's to build or rebuild our own value and purpose, and just remind people that we have an independent sense of what's going on, which social media in all its manifold ways cannot replicate, and if anything, it's going in divergent directions.
And I think also bringing that collective thinking that we're talking to people all the time about so many different subjects, and we're also data mining. We are mining the social media. We are looking at digital and everything else. So actually we have probably a lot more knowledge than we give ourselves credit for, let alone clients. So how do we as an industry bring that to clients? How do we make sure that collective wisdom that we have is actually brought to bear?
Any thoughts on the answer to that question, Maria? Great question.
Well, no, exactly. Well, I think it's up to the individuals. I think that comes down to individuals within research, but also companies that we work for, recognizing that we have this and we should be more proactive. And yes, of course, we're a business. We exist as well to make a profit and all of that. But we have this knowledge which could not only help our clients, but help make the world a better place. And also the whole thing about employee satisfaction. Who now wants to work for an organisation that isn't thinking about sustainability or purpose? And that's including research companies. And you could argue we're a bit late to that table. Like what is our purpose? What is our sustainability goals? So we actually have to practice what we preach, but recognise that we have this huge bank of insights that we could be bringing much more to the world and to our clients.
I guess that's where my thinking about the growing humanities understanding of itself as a purpose, so everyone could be better served, came from. So if I can weigh in if I may on this. I think as an industry, embracing that purpose, and we both talked a lot about purpose and the importance of it for our clients. But for us too,
absolutely,
embracing that purpose and everything that it means, I think is key to our future relevance as an industry.
We have to practice what we preach.
We do. And I think, I would argue that the future of the world is good with market research, better with us than without. Any final thoughts?
No, I completely believe that, and good research. And obviously there is always stuff that goes wrong, or rogues, or deliberate polls, which are completely fabricated. But I think when it's good, it's great, and it actually makes a difference. And organisations or governments or companies can then still be. Companies have to be sustainable in that they have to make a profit and return to shareholders and everything like that. But they can also, they can do that in a way which is doing less harm and improving people's quality of life.
I think as an industry and as a group of professions, we could be less insular as well. That, if our common theme is to understand the inner dynamics of people's minds and their desires, etc., that's quite similar to a lot of other groups like writers and columnists and novelists, etc. But we don't tend to mingle that well. Maybe, I don't know, but I think that's always an opportunity and a challenge for us to get out there more, not just talking to the people.
Have our voice.
Yes,
heard.
yes. That's the irony.
Is
that we go out there fervently listening to people and then wanting to share that, but our own voice tends to be muted as a result.
Little introverted.
Yeah, exactly. We're the interested introverts.
Yes, we're curious, but we're not great at communicating that.
So I think that.
I thought that was just a stereotype. It's actually real. We are introverts, are we?
Pretty much.
Exactly.
We're thinkers, and so perhaps we need to be better at. I think, and that's what I mean by inspiring. Is like, yes, we're the ones that can think and come with the knowledge and the insights. But if you don't inspire, if you don't lift people to a different place, then there's no point. So I think we need to be better at that.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a really fantastic discussion from my point of view. I think we've probably fallen short of solving all the problems of the world, but I think we have really helped. 5 minutes. We've really helped answer that question of why the world would be better off with market research than it would be without. So thank you so much, Murray. It's been a real pleasure.
You're welcome.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.